This is a Macaulay Tucker Show exclusive press junket. Today on the Macaulay Tucker Show, we sit down with director and filmmaker Nicholas Ma to speak about his new film, Mabel, which follows the life of a young girl whose best friend is a potted plant. We hope you enjoy this conversation as we break down his film as well as his life. Congratulations on this project. I can only imagine you spent quite a significant amount of your time putting this together, and it really shows. I had the chance to watch through this, and I didn't know what to expect. One of my favorite parts about this film was just the characters that you have here, the colors, the music, and of course the ending, which I won't spoil. One place where I want to start this conversation from is kind of a fun place. You graduated Harvard, I believe. It was in 2005. Am I correct?
Yes, you're revealing my age, but yeah.
And Harvard is a very interesting place because you are not the only director who came from Harvard, whose very first directional debut had to do with Asian American families, and I thought this was a very interesting thing. Alan Yang, did you ever run into Alan Yang? Do you know much about Alan Yang? Because he was at Harvard.
I'm big fan of Alan's. I don't know him myself, but I'm a huge fan of his work and all of that. Yeah.
He was there the same time that you were there, and I thought that was a very interesting an interesting coincidence as well, because his very first directional debut was also dealing with very much similar themes, and I really enjoyed this project as mentioned earlier. And I think your personal story has a lot of ties to this, because Mabel explores specifically a parent who deeply loves their child. I mean, throughout you see this, but there's kind of a disconnect because the child struggles to connect with their parent because there's not really an understanding. I know for you, creativity has always been a big part of your life, at least in your earlier years as well as later on. I mean, your father being a musician and you also playing music yourself, but you went down a different path, specifically going through management consulting and government work. And here you have Callie, who is a kid obsessed with plants, something nobody really takes seriously. I wanted to ask you how much of your own experience as a child is in this film, if there is any.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I don't know um if I responded to the world the same way that Callie does, but I was certainly a very, very persistent, eager, science-loving, nerdy kid. I was, I was a physics head, and so I had like my threadbare copy of A Brief History of Time, and I'd be very happy to talk to anyone about why black holes were absolutely real and why it was just absurd that people were resisting this idea. Like so I feel a great kinship with Callie and that kind of that sort of unrelenting interest in a specific subject. I think there's a beauty that of childhood, of that desire to find that corner of the world where you can feel like an expert, right? That little corner of the world where you're like, this is what I know. I know all about dinosaurs, or I all know all about anime, or I know all about. I can name every different kind of construction vehicle, or I can, name every, So that, to me, there's something really beautiful about the way those passions emerge. And then, of course, the challenge of feeling those passions that make you feel great also make you feel lonely. That maybe not everyone knows every, kids love movies, right? Not everyone can necessarily say, "Oh yeah, I know every movie that Scorsese did," or what have you. And so I think that there's this way in which we try to create that kind of independence for ourselves, and then we also try to find um, community and other people, and how do those two things interact? I think, my hope for a movie like this is that it becomes something um, that families watch together, right? I think it's
Of
actually
course.
hard as a family to find a movie to watch, right? It's like, okay, we'll watch something that's going to make my 6-year-old happy, or my 12-year-old happy, or my 18-year-old happy, but nothing that sort of where there's something for everybody. And my hope was always to make a movie that fit into that genre of feeling like it sees that experience at all ages of that struggle to be human and to love the people around you.
Oh, of course. And you mentioned there it's hard to find a film where families can gather together and enjoy something together. And certainly this film, I believe, provides that solution, a time for us to sit down and enjoy a film. You mentioned something there that I want to touch on, being human. And you talked about throughout our just our little bit conversation there that it can be hard for individuals to be human in a way and embrace their hobbies, their interests, because it's hard to find people that can relate to it. How have you in your own life been able to I guess in a way be more human? Of
Mhm.
course, with your life, you have bounced around quite a bit with different things and so on. But I'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think being human is like a lifelong uh, task that we set for ourselves. So I hope I'm getting closer. Um, for me, I often think about we're tempted when we feel lonely, when we feel anxious, when we feel overwhelmed, to think I need people that are just like me around me because there's safety in that and there's understanding in that. The thing that I think it's taken me a long time to learn, and probably meeting my husband was the first step on that, is uh, the ways, if our friendships or our loves are based on the ways in which we're similar, then what happens when those things change? What happens if, you stop loving plants or I stop loving anime? Do we still have a friendship? Like, who are we to each other? And so part of being human is loving the humanity in someone else in the way that it's different and sort of reveling in that perspective. And to me, I think so much of Callie's journey, and this is where I'm so grateful to my co-writer Joy for her thoughtfulness and perspectives and our relationship, hers and mine, right, is about loving the way that someone sees the world differently and seeing that as something that complements and enriches my world versus something that makes it smaller. So I think about that a lot. I think about, being human is about being in community. We're not we're not a species that does very well on our own. If you've ever seen a tiny newborn baby, I would fear for that baby if you left them out in the woods. So, and we have a real compulsion to be together for all the pain and challenges that can also create.
And we are community creatures. You did hit the nail there. Even someone who might not just be like a hobo in a shack out in the woods is a community creature, though they might not necessarily like being with people. We ultimately enjoy, for the most part, being around others. And you nailed there as well. We learn from those around us, even those that we might not necessarily think we'll learn something from. I find that a lot in my personal life, friends being a little bit different than I am. But I really see all of these themes throughout this film. I wanted to touch on one thing that kind of connects directly to what you just said, but something that happened long, long ago is, and you actually worked on a project relating to him, but I feel as if he might have a little bit of some influence on this project, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, is Fred Rogers. He spent his entire life specifically built his career around one idea that children deserve to be seen. And in this project, you have this character who, wants to be seen, desperately wants to be seen. And I know that you had an opportunity when you were 6 to, of course, perform "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" with your father on his show. And in this project, of course, you've got a girl who's struggling to connect with her family. I was wondering how much did you literally sitting with Fred as a kid, I guess maybe shape what Mabel became, or at least that influence at an early age.
Yeah, I think that question of seeing through the eyes of a child is something that is direct transmission from Fred. And uh, I think Callie is a it's so easy when you make movies about children to think that you should make them from the perspective of an adult and to see all the ways in which children, what they don't see around them. But really, to me, it's much more fascinating to think about how did we or do we see the world as a 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-year old, in all the ways that it doesn't make sense, and all the ways that maybe we see things that we stop being able to see as we get older. And I think that is such a such a such a gift that Fred always reminded us that there is wisdom in that perspective, not just youth in that perspective.
You can learn a lot from speaking with younger individuals. I'm reading a book right now called The Little Prince, and it deals with the topic of specifically, a younger individual dealing with an adult. And I have enjoyed reading those themes and consuming those themes. And so watching this project was a delight for me. I want to touch base on something as well that you talked about earlier. Of course, plants is a big part of this film, and I'm not sure how much you were involved with specifically. I guess the plant aspect of this film, but I wanted to ask you kind of a fun question. Was there something that you learned about plants in this production that I guess you had no idea about that you still are that you still think about? In fact, maybe are you suddenly now more interested in plants because of this production?
Plants were the alpha and omega for this movie, right? We started with plants and we're ending with plants, and I I I it was an education for me that I threw myself into. I'm so lucky to have a producer, Luca Borghese, who's has a green thumb, because what we didn't necessarily know at the beginning was that we were going to need 8 Mabels in order to get through the production. And each one of them needed to be tended. And, they were by far the most finicky cast members. So, you learn something about what does it take to love and care for plants. And it's a reminder that there is this give and take, between all living things that we have to observe and that we can't escape. You can't just sort of say to a plant, figure yourself out and be ready. That care, that mutual care really is a part of it. So,
Oh, of course. And my last question is this film is coming out very soon. I know you touched on this a little bit earlier, but you have people going to come and watch this. What do you hope they leave with?
yeah, I hope they leave with a reminder that um, movies are something that we experience deeply together, you know. And that doesn't necessarily mean going to a movie theater. It just means I hope that someone watches this movie and says, I want to watch it again, and I know who I want to watch it with, because that'll be fun, because there's going to be a conversation afterwards, or there's going to be an experience that we share. There's going to be a knowing look when they see the relationship between mother and daughter. Because I think that is to me whereas a medium, it thrives, right? And comes to life. I think we long for those moments, right? We long for that sort of that sense that we get to do this thing together. And that's not always so easy as a family to make it to a movie theater, and there's not always so much playing at a movie theater for families. So I hope that we get to do our part to make family movie night a special night.
And you certainly made it a special night for me. And it was wonderful speaking with you, Nicholas. And I hope our paths cross again sometime. I wish you all the best on all the wonderful things that you are doing. Continue to work hard and connect with somebody maybe that you haven't spoken with in a while. Continue to produce the beautiful work that you are producing.